The automatic camera clicked steadily as Major Robert Cowboy Stout's F6F Hellcat swept over Peleliu at 8,000 feet. September 12, 1944. His orders were crystal clear and simple. Photograph the northern airfield and return immediately to USS Hornet. Intelligence had assured him confidently the field was abandoned, probably damaged beyond use by previous bombing raids. Then Stout looked down through his canopy and his blood went absolutely cold. The airfield below wasn't abandoned at all. It was packed with Japanese aircraft in neat rows. Mitsubishi Zeros, Nakajima bombers, dozens of them lined up wingtip-to-wingtip like sardines. Fuel drums stacked in organized rows between aircraft. Ground crews swarming around each plane performing pre-flight checks. They weren't preparing to evacuate. They were preparing for a massive strike against American forces. Stout counted quickly with his combat-trained eye, estimating numbers at least 40 aircraft, all fully armed and fueled for combat. And he knew exactly what they were waiting for with sickening certainty. 3 days from now, 28,000 Marines would storm the beaches of Peleliu in one of the largest amphibious assaults. The invasion fleet was already steaming toward the island at this very moment. These 40 Japanese aircraft were perfectly positioned to massacre them before they reached shore. Stout's training was absolutely clear about proper procedure in this situation. Spot enemy forces, radio the coordinates back to base, return to carrier, let command decide how to respond. A reconnaissance pilot's job was to observe and report intelligence, not engage targets, especially not alone against an entire airfield bristling with anti-aircraft guns. But Stout also understood military bureaucracy from experience. By the time he landed on the carrier, filed his detailed report, and command assembled a proper strike package, hours would pass inevitably. Maybe even a full day with briefings and planning. The Japanese would scatter these aircraft into the jungle, hide them in camouflaged revetments, or worse, launch them against the approaching fleet. The Marines landing on those beaches in 3 days didn't have time for proper procedure and protocols. They needed these planes destroyed right now, not tomorrow after meetings. Stout circled higher, studying the layout below with tactical precision. The Japanese had made a critical mistake in their haste to prepare. The aircraft were packed too close together for safety, surrounded by exposed fuel drums stacked carelessly. One good hit in the right place could start a chain reaction that would consume the entire field. He checked his ammunition counters. 6 50 caliber Browning machine guns, 2,400 rounds total across all weapons. Roughly 12 seconds of sustained fire if he held the triggers down continuously. Not nearly enough to destroy 40 aircraft individually through direct fire, but definitely enough ammunition to light a very big fuse and let physics do the rest. Robert Stout wasn't a reckless pilot prone to stupid decisions. At 28 years old, he'd already flown 63 combat missions over hostile territory. He'd survived dogfights with Zeros, attacked fortified Japanese positions under heavy anti-aircraft fire, landed on carriers in storms that kept other pilots grounded, waiting for better weather. He knew the difference between courage and suicide from hard experience. What he was considering now walked that line very carefully. If he attacked alone, every anti-aircraft gun on Peleliu would immediately target him. He'd be completely alone with no wingmen to suppress ground fire or cover his escape route. His Hellcat could take substantial damage and keep flying, but one lucky shot to the engine or cockpit would send him into the jungle, with no possibility of rescue from Japanese-controlled territory. If he didn't attack and followed orders, those 40 aircraft would launch in coordinated waves against the invasion fleet. Japanese pilots would strafe the crowded landing craft, bomb the vulnerable transport ships, turn the beaches into absolute killing zones. The Marines would die by the hundreds before ever establishing a beachhead on shore. Stout had seen firsthand what happened when Marines landed under Japanese air attack from his support missions. He'd flown close air support at Tarawa, where Japanese planes had wreaked havoc on the first waves. He'd watched helplessly from above as bombers targeted crowded landing craft that couldn't maneuver or defend themselves. The decision took less than 30 seconds of circling. Stout pushed the throttle forward and rolled the Hellcat into a steep dive toward the target. The altimeter unwound rapidly as he dropped toward the jungle canopy covering the island. His plan was simple and brutal. Come in fast and low below radar, hit the fuel drums first, get out before the anti-aircraft gunners could track him effectively. At 2,000 feet, he leveled off and pushed the throttle to the firewall. The Hellcat accelerated rapidly to nearly 400 miles per hour, the engine screaming at maximum power. Trees blurred beneath him in a green carpet as he dropped to barely 50 feet above the jungle. The airfield appeared suddenly through a gap in the trees without warning. Japanese ground crews looked up in confusion at the unexpected sound. Some froze in shock, others dove desperately for cover. None reached their anti-aircraft gun positions in time to stop what was coming. Stout lined up on the northern row of aircraft and squeezed the trigger hard. All 6 machine guns opened fire simultaneously, their combined roar drowning out even the engine noise. Tracers walked across the tarmac in bright streams, stitching through the thin aluminum skin of a Zero. The fighter shuddered violently under the impacts, fuel spraying from ruptured tanks. Stout adjusted his aim slightly and fired directly into a cluster of fuel drums stacked between 2 bombers. The drums disintegrated under .50 caliber fire, aviation fuel exploding in a massive fireball that engulfed both aircraft instantly in flames. The explosion was bigger than Stout had anticipated from his calculations. Flames leapt 50 feet into the air. The blast wave rocked his Hellcat violently as he pulled up hard to avoid the fireball. Behind him, the fire spread with terrifying speed across the tarmac. The first burning Zero ignited the aircraft parked directly beside it. That fire spread to another, then another in sequence, each explosion feeding the next like dominoes. Within seconds, half the northern row was completely engulfed in flames. Japanese ground crews ran in all directions, abandoning equipment, giving up any attempt to save the aircraft. Anti-aircraft gunners finally reached their positions and opened fire desperately, but Stout was already climbing away, weaving left and right to spoil their aim. Tracers arced past his canopy close enough to see. He felt solid impacts shudder through the airframe as 20mm rounds punched through his tail section. Warning lights flickered ominously on the instrument panel, but the engine kept running strong and smooth. He banked hard right, gaining altitude and circling back around for assessment. Below, the devastation exceeded his expectations dramatically. Nearly 20 aircraft were burning intensely, the flames spreading across the tarmac in a river of fire. Thick black smoke boiled into the sky, visible for miles around the island. But on the southern end of the field, at least 20 more aircraft sat untouched and operational. Stout checked his ammunition counters, half gone already. Maybe 6 seconds of firing time left, maximum. The anti-aircraft gunners were ready now, tracking him as he circled overhead. Coming back for a second pass was asking to be shot down by prepared defenders. He rolled inverted and dove anyway toward the southern targets. This time the anti-aircraft fire was immediate and absolutely intense. Tracers filled the air around him like angry hornets swarming. He jinked hard left, then right, never holding a straight line long enough for gunners to lead him properly. The Hellcat shuddered under more impacts, metal tearing somewhere in the fuselage behind him. Stout came in from a completely different angle, targeting the bombers on the southern end. His remaining ammunition hammered into the aircraft, shredding control surfaces and puncturing fuel tanks. He walked his fire across a fuel truck which exploded with enough force to flip a nearby bomber onto its back. The secondary explosions started immediately in a chain reaction. Burning fuel from the truck spread to stacked ammunition crates, which detonated in a rapid series of blasts. The bomber's own ordnance cooked off from the heat, tearing the aircraft apart from within violently. Within moments, the southern row was burning as fiercely as the northern had. Stout's guns fell silent, completely empty of ammunition. He'd fired every single round he carried. The Hellcat felt sluggish as he pulled up, damaged control surfaces making it fight him. More warning lights illuminated. Something was leaking badly, leaving a thin trail of smoke behind. But below him, the entire airfield was an inferno consuming everything. Every aircraft, every fuel drum, every structure was consumed by fire spreading rapidly. The smoke column rose thousands of feet, marking the spot like a funeral pyre visible across the island. Stout pointed the damaged Hellcat toward the ocean and nursed it back to USS Hornet carefully. The hydraulics were failing, making the controls heavy and unresponsive to his inputs. Oil pressure was dropping steadily on the gauge. He wasn't sure the landing gear would extend properly for landing, but at least the engine was still running despite the damage. The flight back felt longer than the attack itself had. Adrenaline faded gradually, replaced by the realization of what he'd just done. He'd directly disobeyed explicit orders from command. Instead of taking photographs and returning like he was told, he'd single-handedly attacked an entire airfield alone. Court-martial was a real possibility that could end his career. So was getting chewed out by every officer between him and the admiral in the chain of command. But the alternative, watching those 40 aircraft massacre the Marines in their landing craft, would have been worse than any punishment the Navy could hand down. The Hornet appeared on the horizon finally. Stout radioed the tower and reported his situation honestly. Aircraft damaged, uncertain about landing gear status, requesting priority landing clearance. The carrier turned into the wind and cleared the deck for emergency landing. His landing gear extended, but only partially and unevenly. One wheel wouldn't lock into position properly. He came in hot and caught the second arresting wire. The damaged Hellcat slammed onto the deck hard enough to buckle metal and throw sparks. Deck crews swarmed the aircraft immediately, visibly shocked at the extensive damage. The tail section was completely shredded. The fuselage had over a dozen holes punched through it. The paint was scorched black from flying through explosions and fire. Stout climbed down from the cockpit and found himself facing a crowd of officers waiting. The air boss wanted to know why he'd returned with combat damage from a reconnaissance mission. The squadron commander wanted to know why he'd broken radio silence during the flight. The intelligence officer wanted to know what the hell had happened over Peleliu that wasn't in the mission plan. Stout's report was simple and direct, without embellishment. The airfield wasn't abandoned like intelligence said. It was packed with aircraft preparing to attack the invasion fleet in 3 days. He'd destroyed them completely, all of them. 40 aircraft gone, 8 minutes start to finish. The officers stared at him in silence. The intelligence officer asked him to repeat the number in disbelief. 40 aircraft destroyed by one pilot in a single aircraft flying alone. That seemed impossible by any standard. Reconnaissance photos confirmed everything the next day. The northern airfield at Peleliu was completely destroyed beyond repair. Not a single aircraft remained operational. Aerial photos showed the burned-out hulks of exactly 40 Japanese planes scattered across a blackened tarmac. Fuel dumps were smoking craters. Structures were rubble. Intelligence officers immediately revised their assessment of Japanese air strength on Peleliu. Instead of facing 40 aircraft on D-Day, the Marines would hit the beaches with complete air superiority. The Japanese air threat had been eliminated by one pilot who'd refused to follow orders. The Navy awarded Stout the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for combat valor after the Medal of Honor. The citation praised his extraordinary heroism and aggressive fighting spirit in attacking superior enemy forces alone. His decision to engage had directly saved American lives, though the battle that followed was brutal regardless. The Marines landed on September 15, 1944, and immediately faced some of the most intense fighting in the Pacific War. Japanese forces had fortified the island's coral ridges and caves, turning every position into a deadly stronghold. The battle lasted over 2 months and cost nearly 2,000 American lives in savage fighting. Yet without Stout's attack, the casualties would have been far worse on that first day. Those 40 Japanese aircraft would have attacked during the vulnerable first hours of the invasion, when Marines were packed in landing craft and transport ships unable to maneuver. Air attacks on amphibious assaults were devastating because the troops couldn't take cover or defend themselves. Military historians later calculated that Stout's solo attack probably saved between 500 and 1,000 Marine lives, just in the first day alone before the beachhead was established. His 8 minutes of combat had accomplished what a full squadron of bombers might have achieved, and he'd done it at exactly the critical moment before the Japanese could disperse their aircraft. After the war ended, Stout returned to California and lived quietly without seeking attention. He rarely spoke about what he'd done over Peleliu to anyone. His children grew up knowing their father had served in the Pacific, but they didn't learn the details until decades later. The Navy Cross sat in a drawer, not displayed on any wall in his home. Friends who knew him described a man who was uncomfortable with attention or praise for his actions. When asked about the attack, he'd downplay it consistently. "I saw planes that needed destroying, so I destroyed them," he'd say. Any pilot would have done the same thing, but not every pilot would have made that choice. Most would have followed orders exactly, radioed back, and let command handle it through proper channels. That bureaucratic approach would have given the Japanese time to scatter their aircraft or launch them. Stout's willingness to disobey orders and trust his own judgment made the difference between disaster and success. His story remained largely unknown outside military aviation circles until historians rediscovered the mission reports decades later. When researchers cross-referenced his Navy Cross citation with Japanese records and aerial photos, they realized the full significance. 1 man, 1 aircraft, 8 minutes of combat, 40 enemy planes destroyed completely, potentially 1,000 lives saved from a single decision. The attack demonstrated something that military strategists study to this day, in training courses: the value of initiative at the tactical level. Stout couldn't have known for certain that his decision was correct when he made it. He was guessing about the Japanese plans, gambling that his assessment of the threat was accurate, betting his life on his ability to execute the attack successfully. Everything about the situation argued for caution and following procedure. Follow orders, report back to the carrier. Let someone higher up decide what to do. But Stout understood that sometimes the person on the ground, seeing the situation with their own eyes, has better judgment than commanders looking at maps and reports miles away without direct observation. His willingness to trust his own assessment, even when it meant directly disobeying orders, embodied something: the principle of commander's intent. The Navy hadn't ordered him to attack that airfield in his mission briefing, but they had sent him to protect the invasion force from threats. He understood the intent behind his mission and adapted when circumstances demanded immediate action. The Navy recognized this in awarding him the Navy Cross rather than court-martialing him for disobedience. They understood that rigid adherence to orders would have resulted in disaster for the Marines. Stout's disobedience was actually the highest form of following intent over instruction when needed. Modern fighter pilots study Stout's attack in tactical training courses today, not just for the flying skills it demonstrated, but for the decision-making under extreme pressure. The military teaches that sometimes following orders to the letter means missing opportunities that won't come again. The attack also demonstrated perfect target prioritization under time pressure. Stout didn't waste ammunition trying to destroy 40 aircraft individually through direct fire. He identified the fuel drums as the critical vulnerability and exploited it ruthlessly. 1 bullet in the right place accomplished more than 1,000 bullets in the wrong places. His approach from multiple angles, coming in low and fast to minimize exposure to anti-aircraft fire, showed tactical sophistication. He'd analyzed the defenses instantly, planned his attack runs mentally, and executed them despite taking damage. And critically, he'd known when to stop and get out. After expending his ammunition, he didn't loiter trying to assess damage or looking for additional targets. He got out immediately. The mission was accomplished. Staying longer would have been pointless risk with no benefit. All of these decisions happened in seconds under fire with no time for careful deliberation or consultation. Stout's training and experience let him make split-second choices that each proved correct. Robert "Cowboy" Stout died in 2005 at the age of 89. His family finally shared his story publicly, and military historians rushed to preserve the details before they were lost forever. The mission reports, reconnaissance photos, and Navy cross-citation all confirmed what seemed almost too dramatic to believe. In the final analysis, Stout's attack over Peleliu stands as one of the most successful solo strikes in naval aviation history. No other single pilot destroyed as many enemy aircraft in one mission during World War II. His 8 minutes of combat prevented what would have been a devastating air attack on the Peleliu invasion. The Marines who landed on those beaches never knew that a Navy pilot had disobeyed orders to save their lives. They fought through hell on that coral island, facing Japanese defenders in fortified positions that turned every yard into a battle. But at least they didn't face 40 aircraft strafing them as they tried to reach shore. Sometimes the most heroic thing a soldier can do is refuse to follow orders when the situation demands it, not out of cowardice or rebellion, but because the situation demands action that rigid adherence to procedure would prevent. Stout understood this instinctively. When confronted with a choice between doing what he was told and doing what needed to be done, he chose the mission over the orders without hesitation. His legacy lives in every tactical training course that teaches initiative over obedience, adaptation over rigidity, trust in the judgment of people on the ground seeing reality. The military learned from Stout and pilots like him that sometimes the best course of action is the one nobody ordered you to take. The next time you face a situation where following the rules seems wrong, where rigid procedure conflicts with obvious necessity, remember Cowboy Stout circling over that airfield. He knew what needed to happen. He knew it would cost him if he was wrong. And he did it anyway because the alternative was unacceptable.